Okay, I think we can probably get started. A couple housekeeping items. If anybody has questions throughout the panel, you're welcome to type them into the chat box, and I will be keeping tabs on the questions. And closer to the end of the panel, about the last 15 or 20 minutes, we're going to be going over those questions with the panelists. And to start it off, me and Rachel will be giving a quick 5-minute presentation on impact careers. So I'm just going to share my screen. Up. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, Rachel, I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Erin, and thank you everyone for joining us today for our second event in the Impact series, our panel on Gender Equity's Competitive Edge. My name is Rachel Gradine. I'm a program manager with Decentralized Energy Canada, and Erin and I will be delivering this little introductory presentation before we kick off the panel. So I'll start off with a little bit about DEC. So DEC is a national nonprofit industry association, which serves and is driven by its members. We are based out of Calgary, but our focus is on the development of decentralized energy across all of Canada. We are the market access hub for all things decentralized energy and offer a network pathway for entrepreneurs, startups, and other businesses in the industry. And we have over 100 members in our network and an online reach of over 10,000 subscribers. And if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about us, you can head to our website, www.deassociation.ca. So DEC's mission is to disrupt the Canadian energy status quo and create opportunities for decentralized energy by convening, educating, and engaging stakeholders. And our impact program aims to do just that by educating and raising awareness about critical topics that have a large impact on the industry. For example, the business case for gender equity, the sustainable innovations that are disrupting the industry, and the value of mentorship on career development. And throughout the program, we are inviting experts at the leading edge of their fields to identify the jobs of the future. We are promoting job opportunities to connect job seekers to sustainable employers. And we are speaking to how the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are being integrated into the decentralized energy job market. Essentially, our program aims to highlight the opportunities that come from having a sustainability-focused workforce in achieving a just energy transition. Now for a few more logistical details, where the program is being held virtually, making it easily accessible to Canadians everywhere. And the program will feature a series of webinars, panels, and matchmaking sessions with some of the most progressive business leaders in Canada. When the program is running generally on a weekly basis from September until November, and the program events will generally be happening around this time of day as well. And you can find out more about the upcoming events on our website. And why? Well, there's a skill gap that needs to be filled to achieve a just energy transition in Canada. And our impact program shows how the SDGs are being integrated into Canada's job market and how they contribute to filling that gap. And now I'll hand off the presentation to Erin to speak about our upcoming programming.
Thanks, Rachel. My name's Erin. I'm the marketing manager for Decentralized Energy Canada. So as Rachel mentioned, we have a bunch of upcoming webinars that are focused on the UN's SDGs. So the one that's coming up next is focused on SDG 11, which is Sustainable Cities and Communities. That one is happening on October 6th from 12 to 1:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And we have some great panelists lined up. They're going to be speaking towards the challenges and solutions that come with urbanization. As part of Impact, we do have sponsorship opportunities available. There's 3 different levels, all with different incentives. So if you're looking for a speaking opportunity like being on the panel today or future webinars, you're welcome to get in contact with me. Or if you're looking for branding and marketing exposure to really promote your sustainable initiatives, feel free to get in contact with me after the webinar and we can explore opportunities. So opportunities in terms of speaking slots that are still available are SDG 7, 9, 12, and 13. And again, these are happening into October and November, as Rachel mentioned, generally on a weekly basis. I wanted to send a huge thank you to our program partners who have helped make Impact Careers possible, Schneider Electric, EHRC, and Women in Power. We truly appreciate your support and we couldn't have done this without you. And that's it from me. Here are Rachel and I's contact information if you'd like to get in touch with us. And And now I will pass it off to Charlene. I just need to stop sharing my screen. How do I stop? Oh, there it is. Different platform, you know?
Yeah. So yes, I'm Charlene Gatcha, founder and CEO of Women in Power, and thank you for the shout out, Erin. We're very pleased to be here today, and especially to discuss this topic on the topic of diversity. We are the pandemic, and we were intended to be an event-based corporation or company, but what we ended up doing was doing a lot of virtual work, and it actually worked out really well because it's been an interesting time for women in the industry and how we've been impacted by COVID. So we've developed a community where women can come together and connect with and get support, to be inspired and to be recognized by each other, both personally and professionally. So we've developed a number of programs and initiatives to support women in the industry, and this is just another way that we'd like to support the work that's being done and share all this great work that's been done by this panel. So I'm pleased to be here today with our panelists. We've got Leanne Song-Hing, from a psychology professor from the University of Guelph, and Jim Gilliland, Director, Engineering Services of Williams Engineering. Tisha Iglesias, Manager of Talent, Partners and Inclusion at the Alberta Electric System Operator, and Jana Gerber, Principal Sustainability Consulting at Schneider Electric. So I'll hand, these panelists actually will be with us today to speak on a number of topics, and I'll have some questions that I'll provide to them, and we'll kind of let the conversation go where it goes. But just first off, I'll hand it over to the panelists to do their introductions, and then we'll dive into some of the questions that we have about this topic. So Leanne, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. So I'm a professor in psychology at the University of Guelph. I'm in the Industrial Organizational Psychology program. So we basically take our knowledge of psychology and apply it to understand issues within the workplace. I personally have been studying issues of inequality my whole career, so that's starting to stretch on a little bit now. So I'd say for about 25 years now, I've been looking at issues around gender inequalities, racial inequalities, issues around status and power inequalities, income inequality. And what I'm particularly interested in is how people's reactions to these inequalities really depend on their beliefs about justice and what's fair.
Thanks, Leanne. Jim, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Darn, I'm the first one to make that mistake. Glad to be here today, and I'm really happy and excited to be able to share my experiences and the experiences of Williams Engineering around this really important topic of gender equity. I'd like to share my screen just for a brief moment and go through just some quick highlights about Williams Engineering and what we're doing in this area. Just pulling it up here. So hopefully everybody can see my screen.
Yep, looks good.
Yeah.
So Williams Engineering is a buildings engineering design consulting company, and we do all of these things listed here. But frankly, this is quite boring, and really just the tools that we use every day in our jobs. Who we really are as an organization is more, it's better described here on the screen. Our purpose is to brighten the lives of people in our community, aligned with the United Nations sustainability goals that we've specifically targeted in our strategic plan. We believe in the value of shared knowledge, diverse perspectives, and to provide innovative solutions to our communities in cities and remote regions across Canada. So we recognize that our people and engineering firms, like ours, have an opportunity to make a big impact on our communities in which we live and work, and build relationships that will be meaningful and provide better outcomes. So we're always searching for the best outcomes on the projects we work on, and getting that outcome, it's very important and necessary to include all aspects of diversity of thought and different opinions and ideas to really get the best outcomes. So that includes things like empathy and equity, of course, it being really important. So everybody has an equal part of the participation in the conversation. So at the end of the day, we need to reflect our communities that we work in order to provide a sustainable solutions, but also for the sustainability of our business. So inside Williams, we are trying to achieve the best outcomes possible by addressing the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've launched into a journey with Flipped Learning as an outside consultant to assess these issues inside our organization and how we can, the current status quo, the priorities of our people inside our organization, as well as making sure that everybody inside our organization knows why these issues are very important. And ultimately, we're not a perfect organization, and we have things that we need to work on. So that is why we're working with Flipped Learning to improve our equity and improve our diversity inside the organization. One of the things in particular, we're very proud that we just hired our first adaptation and resiliency training person through an Alberta-based but government-funded program. This person will be looking at the role of gender diversity in STEM issues for holistically tackling climate change response. So there's literature that says that women will be disproportionately affected by climate change, and so we want to take a look at this issue and help bring the issues of gender forward in this conversation around climate change. So, in engineering, it's one of the most notorious professions, as it relates to gender equity problems, and so we are trying to promote gender equity inside our organization and across our industry. It's very important, and it's a very important part of achieving a much better outcome for our business, our clients, as well as our community. So thanks.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a lot more about that today, so that'll be exciting. Thank you, Jim. Can I pass it over to Tisha?
Thank you, Charlene. Hello, everyone. My name is Tisha. I use the she, her pronouns, and I have about 20 years experience in human resources that spans over various fields such as healthcare, information technology, and utility sector. Have a Bachelor of Management from the University of Lethbridge and a few designations under my belt, such as the Certified Professional in Human Resources and Society of Human Resources Senior Certified Professional. So apart from that, and the designation and professional side of things, in terms of what's really drew me to the field of human resources particularly, is really that opportunity to be able to help people solve problems and capitalize on opportunities to thrive. And currently I work for Alberta Electric System Operator as the Manager of Talent, Partners and Inclusion, and definitely have had that ability to shape and influence a lot of our talent and inclusion strategies to evolve our culture. And similar to Jim, we're on a journey, and we don't have it all necessarily figured out, but definitely we've started over the past 2 years to really advance inclusion in our organization. And I'm fairly proud about some of the work that we've done and some of the firsts that we've done in our organization. We had our first Pride Awareness event this month and our first Indigenous Awareness and Reconciliation event we're planning next week. So, for us, inclusion is front and center from a strategic perspective, also from an employee experience perspective, and gender and gender equity is definitely where we're starting to really put a lot of more attention into and to truly advance a full-on inclusive experience. So thrilled to be part of the opportunity to be part of the conversation today, along with Leanne, Jim, Jana, and Charlene.
Thank you, Tisha. And last but not least, Jana.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here to represent Schneider Electric. I am a principal in our sustainability division, representing North America. I've been in this team for the last year or two, and actually started my career in this organization as well. Been with Schneider for about 20 years and done multiple things in the organization, and I call it my circular career, similar to a circular economy type path, to make a joke. But Schneider, what we do is we really help our customers with their sustainability journey, help them understand how to set ambitions where they would like to go. And, Schneider's strategy is really set on two different sides. We are also focused very heavily on sustainability across ESG internally to our company as well. And in fact, this last year, we were recognized as the most sustainable company by Corporate Knights there in Canada. So, very inclusive. Our employee value proposition is really set on three main pillars. around the being meaningful and driving a meaningful approach to our work, which is very much funded and kind of set in that foundation of sustainability, but also in an inclusive environment for everybody to bring their authentic self to work, and then being empowered. So those are really kind of our 3 levers of our employee value proposition as well. So again, thrilled to be here and excited for the conversation as we move forward.
I was on mute. Wonderful. Thank you, Jana. Alrighty, well, let's get started. We've got some fulsome discussion to get through today, and we just to kind of kick things off, we called this panel the diversity, gender equity competitive edge, and we had some discussion in our planning sessions around equality and equity and the definitions in relation to that. And we talked a bit in these introductions about why organizations should care about gender equity and what are some of the outcomes that we can expect from that. Jim, you spoke to that a bit in your presentation. So I'd like to get us, we're going to start today with Leanne and the work that she's done on the research side to give us a little bit of an overview on in context for this discussion, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let me share my slides. All right, is this working?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so so that we can have a most fruitful conversation about gender issues in the workplace, I thought it would be really important that we're all using the same terms and knowing what people are meaning through their use of these terms. So often we hear terms like gender equity, gender equality, gender diversity, and so I want to just start with a little bit of a guide to terminology. So first of all, when people are talking about gender diversity, this is really the idea that many genders are being represented. So, you know, within, let's say, an organization, there's lots of men and there's lots of women, and there are lots of people who are non-binary. So there might be two-spirit or genderqueer, gender fluid. But the experiences that people with these different identities are having is not clear, right? So how they're being treated is not clear, because when we're talking about diversity, it really is about demographic representation. It's a numbers game. When we're talking about gender equality, we're even getting more focused on a specific number, 50-50, right? So if the goal is gender equality in leadership, then we're going to have 50% of our executives being women, or for the organization as a whole, 50% of our employees are women. Again, it's not clear how women and men might be being treated differently within the organization. And because there's such an emphasis placed on targets, the deservingness of women being hired or promoted into these positions is also unclear, which can be really damaging in terms of how others view them, but also in terms of how they view themselves. It can create things like a crisis of competence. And so instead, what I would like to focus our conversation on today is the notion of gender equity. And so when there's gender equity, the outcomes and treatment that people receive depends on their abilities, right? So how we treat others, what kind of pay they get, depends on their skills, their abilities, their performance, and it's not based on their gender. However, in order for us to get to such a level of what could be called a meritocracy, there actually has to be equal opportunities for people of all genders to succeed. But that's not the case in many organizations today. And instead, there's this big gap in terms of the barriers that women are facing versus the men, and it's worse for people who are non-binary. And so how can we create conditions for gender equity to exist? One way is for organizations to focus on creating a positive gender diversity climate, right? So ensuring that discrimination is eliminated, assuring that people of all genders are treated fairly and that they are included, they're given a sense of belonging, not only in terms of things like social treatment and identity, but also in terms of decision-making power. So to the question of why is gender equity work needed in the Canadian energy industries, I've got some basic stats, all Canadian for you. So first of all, there's twice the number of women who experience gender discrimination at work than men. Women comprise 94% of all sexual harassment victims at work, yet they make up only 18% of executive officers in Canada. Moving to the energy industry, they make up 19% of the workforce in oil, gas, and mining. But if we look at employees as a whole, they're just over 50%. And as Jim noted about engineering, the participation rate of women in engineering is 13%. Moving beyond Canada to all industrialized countries, it's estimated that women make up about 20 to 25% of the labor force in renewable energy. So we can see from these stats that we certainly haven't reached gender equality, that we're not doing that great in terms of gender diversity. And when we look at experiences of greater discrimination at work, greater sexual harassment, you can add to that list problems with work-life conflict. We're not reaching gender equity either. So a question that gets asked a lot as organizations think about embarking on this work is, well, what are the outcomes of greater gender equity? Can a business case be made for gender diversity, gender equity, gender equality? And so there's this great promise of diversity. Theoretically, it makes so much sense that if we're able to open up avenues for inclusion in the workplace, if we're able to reduce discrimination, people are able to bring their whole and authentic selves to work, that we're going to be able to capitalize on all of these diverse perspectives, and that people would be able to perform stronger, and so organizations will perform stronger. And if I was a diversity consultant, I would cherry pick some study findings for you to show you, yes, you can find evidence of all of these effects. However, the literature is actually pretty messy, and it has been for a very long time. And so as an academic, what I thought I would try to do for you today is cut through some of this hype to give you, as best as I can, a simple take-home message on what the research studies find in relation to these issues. So first of all, I'm going to orient you to not just look at the outcomes of single studies, because you can find other studies that have different outcomes. So I'm going to be presenting findings based on meta-analyses. And so meta-analyses are when you take all of the study findings from a research topic, collapse it all together, and you find out, okay, so overall, what is the actual result? And then I also want to disentangle the issue of correlation versus causation. So even if we do find, let's say, greater gender equity is related to more positive performance outcomes for an organization, is it necessarily the case that having, let's say, more women in leadership actually leads to stronger organizational performance? Or is it something about those organizations, right? So is it maybe the case that organizations that are really concerned with fairness and ethical treatment of their employees are more likely to have women in leadership, and they're more likely to have employees that are engaged and devoted and working harder, and therefore stronger organizational performance? So I'll try to draw on the strongest data to try to answer this question. So in terms of the outcomes, there's actually, if you look at meta-analyses, no strong substantive effects of gender diversity on team performance. So if you take teams that are comprised of all women, or teams that are made up of all men, or teams that have a mix of men and women within them, those teams perform equally well. Similarly, if you look at gender diversity within an organization, there's no effect on organizational performance, nor is there an effect on organizational performance if you look at gender diversity of the boards or gender diversity at the executive level. And so while this might seem like bad news to many of you, it's not what you're hoping you're going to hear me say. I want to make a case for why in this type of phenomena, no news is actually good news. So there's many reasons why we would actually think that greater gender diversity would result in worse performance. Okay, so we know that in many workplaces, there isn't a positive gender diversity climate, right? So women face discrimination. People hold negatives, including women, hold negative stereotypes about women's competence. People basically, at a very core level, prefer and feel more comfortable interacting with those who they consider to be like them. And so all of these basic psychological processes operate against us thinking that more gender diversity would result in better performance. So the fact that it doesn't hurt performance is actually a good news story. When we look at organizational performance, there's this phenomena called the glass cliff phenomena. And so if you look at, so we know that women are underrepresented at top leadership levels, but when women do achieve those positions, they're more likely than men to be placed into leadership at times when the organizational performance is really precarious. So it's called the glass cliff phenomena because here you go, good luck. And so again, if there's no negative effect of women in these top leadership positions, regardless of the fact that they're being placed into these precarious positions, is a good news story for how women are performing as leaders. Second, when we look at the effect of gender equality in leadership, here the literature does show consistent effects that the more women there are in leadership at the executive level or at the board level, there's better corporate social responsibility and better environmental performance. And so again, that we've got this question, is this a correlation or is this actually a causal effect? And in the best studies that I've found, they track these organizational performance on environmental indicators over time, and they show that bringing more women into these leadership positions leads to better environmental performance later. And then finally, if you look at studies that are actually focused in on gender equity or diversity climate more broadly, and so we see not just the issue of numbers, not just the issue of representation, but actual looking at the treatment that women experience within these organizations, the more positive the diversity climate, the stronger the performance is at the individual level, but also at the organizational level. The more engaged employees are, the more committed they are, the higher the job satisfaction they have. And so you can actually come back to making a business case for gender equity. And so I just want to close by saying that the growth of the renewable energy sector provides great opportunities for gender equity. But I hope that what I've covered so far convinces you that in order for this to be realized, it must be managed properly. And here are all my reference for those who are interested. Thanks.
Thank you, Leanne. That was awesome. I know you're going to be able to add some color to the conversation as we go along. I'm talking about more the personal experiences on the corporate side, but how that relates to some of the research that you've done and add back to that. So we'll get started with our questions, and I want to start with this is for the panel. So we'll start with Jim, and then we can, everyone can kind of chime in. But when we think about companies with successful gender equity, what would that look like, or what does that look like?
It's within Williams, and as you know, from my own personal perspective as well, it's a real challenge to define what that success looks like, what our objectives really are. And I think at the end of the day, if we no longer have to talk about the issue, then that's probably a good reflection of the fact that it's not an issue any longer. But it's going to take some time to get there, so we're going to need to address it front on and make sure that we're combing through the organization to ensure that the concerns and reservations and information that people need to get and understand is distributed through the whole organization, so everybody is aligned. So having that filter through the whole organization is probably going to take it's most challenging and take the most amount of time. So that would be a few of the factors that I would identify for in my world anyway.
Thanks, Jim.
Oh, you want to jump in, Tisha, or you want?
Go ahead, Jen. Yeah.
So, we talked a little bit about, Schneider's, really our employee value proposition about being meaningful, inclusive, and empowered. And I think that, a lot of really focusing in on the latter two elements of our strategy. It's about that innovation. And, Leanne talked about it a little bit with just even some of the things being brought around, corporate responsibility or long-term environmental performance. How do we really get that innovation, and that innovation comes from everybody being really willing to speak up and bring their true authentic self to work. So you know, for me, it's about how do you really see the best in every person on the team and help them bring that authentic self and that voice to the conversation.
And to be comfortable, to have a culture, you know, a culture that supports that. Exactly. Tisha, did you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Charlene. I definitely agree with both Jim and Jana's sentiments. And I think too, building off of building of the culture, I think that there's also at play, you know, also how you look at talent as well, and looking at, and Leanne mentioned that too, in terms of, you know, abilities, not so much on just the gender, but really what are people bringing to the table, and how do we look at that in a very holistic way, through all of that, your talent management chain, right? From the first inception of meeting a potential candidate to they come in and then going through their career and development. And yeah, so I really truly believe it's equally as much a culture imperative for an organization to really take a lens and stock of where they are, just as much it is a strategic imperative in developing, you know, what their strategic priorities and or goals are with regards to obtaining gender equity. But, you know, to Jim's point, I don't think there's one simple answer. Every organization is different, and have to understand their industry, their internal population of their, you know, male-female spread and other gender identities that exist as well too. You don't want to forget about, you know, full gender diversity in order to achieve equity as well.
Thanks, Tisha. Yeah, and we'll dive into some of that, you know, in terms of the challenges, and that's actually one of the next question that I'd like to ask the panel. What are the main challenges? So we're talking about gender equity and what success looks like. So what are the challenges? You've touched briefly on them, but what are they in the workplace, and what steps can organizations take to confront change and move the needle forward? And then we'll have Leanne speak a little bit about, you know, we'll talk about what organizations do, and then let's talk a little bit more about this at a societal level and some of those issues. So maybe if you want to kick that off, Tisha, just you're on a roll, and then we'll go back to others.
For sure. You know, what can organizations do with respect to, if I take you know, our organization as example, the ISO, we employ STEM professions, and so, you know, we face that gender equity challenge just in the perspective of the underrepresentation of women in STEM careers. So, you know, this is something that as an organization, it's really not even just our sole ability to try to confront change. And how do we change the, you know, applicants of graduates coming out of some of those programs in order to attract them to consider us as a place of work. And so, you know, I see an opportunity for organizations to really try to maybe go back further than just the university level, and how can they target at, you know, grade school level, or partnering with other organizations that are actively there, partnering with industry and academia to really try to promote STEM careers in dynamic ways, and particularly in young women, if I just use women as an example. So I see that as a key pivotal strategy that one can undertake. For us personally, we've looked at Operation Minerva. We've been partnering with them for the past 8 years, and have even expanded that program so that when we bring in you know, grade 8 girls that are assigned to our organization, we've even expanded that for our internal employees to say, hey, you know, do you have any daughters or cousins or nieces or you know, best friends' daughters kind of things, bring them in and let them have an opportunity as well to partake, where, you know, it's really about promoting the different STEM careers that we have here in our organization, and a little bit about the work that we do. Many leave and we're just in awe of, you know, what they can do as a profession in pursuing science, technology, engineering, or mathematical skill set. And Another partnering organization that we've partnered with is the Advancement of Science and Engineering Education, which is dedicated to inspire future science and engineering leaders from K to 12. And we've leveraged our EIT cohort that we have within our organization to be a part of that. So, intentionally bringing in even some young female engineering training employees to go out there too and be some of that face, so that other young girls could see other women who've done the studies, went out there and they have a career in this space, and talk about some of the work that they're doing. But that's what I see at an organizational level, and from a societal level, I think that it goes deeper to just overall consciousness and just how we even look at gender stereotypes for boys and girls. And and I feel like we're all there. We all play a role and a part in the biases that we have, unconscious, the inherent things that we grew up with, it's very real. So I think that from a societal perspective, it goes fairly deep. But it's an opportunity for us in our daily walk, as much as in the roles that we play in our organizations, to really try to shape and influence those shifts.
Great, thank you. Someone else want to step in?
Can I go ahead and jump in here? I'll jump in really quick, and then let you, Jim, it looked like you were about to say something as well. I think that for that question, it's very much a multi-tier, and Tisha did a great job of explaining a lot of the different angles. And so for Schneider, when we look at it, we really look at it through 4 levers of our strategy. One being that empowered diversity, which Tisha talked about, making sure we reflect the diversities of the communities in which we operate. The inclusive practices, things like family leave. In 2017, Schneider put in place a global family leave policy that is not just for either maternal mothers, but depending on the status of the family, it's the primary caregiver is the way we phrase it inside of our terminology. And that is inclusive not only for, people who give birth, but also for adoptive situations as well, which is a very cool situation from a family perspective, again, from an inclusivity of, everybody is in different situations of how their families come to be. And then our third lever is around that inclusive behaviors. And, one thing I thought about when Tisha was talking in the last question was really around, that recruiting situation. And it is about those hidden biases and really recognizing them. It can go even just to the name on the resume, not looking as deep into the skills and competencies of the individual, but just utilizing some of those hidden biases at times inside of just the name. And so how do we move beyond that element of it as well? And then finally, around advocacy is our fourth, and Schneider Electric signed on as the He for She Impact back in 2015, mandating. And Schneider is a global company; we operate all around the world, and so ensuring that all of our country presidents signed on to that to promote that and drive that culture inside of our countries and inside of our teams. So, I think again, it's just that it's very multi-tiered, and I think Tisha and I said a lot of the same things, but it's just how do you really kind of think about that from all those different levers.
I'll just add a couple of points onto that, which would be the element of education and understanding within an organization of why this matters and why what benefits that people can achieve out of this. Dealing with unknown sort of personal biases, people have blind spots around some of these things and don't even realize that that might be holding them back or holding the organization back. Another issue that we found is the traditional expectations of a STEM career, for instance, where people women and others just assume that they're going to have to work crazy hours and they're going to have to be available at all hours of the day, and that they're going to have to put their work first before their family, and or show up at work from 8 until 8 at night, or else be looked down upon or having their careers held back. And so they're more likely to exit the profession unless the expectations are really clarified and we're really clear about the goals we're trying to achieve and the flexibility and how women or other genders can easily be accommodated in a flexible work environment to accommodate their personal lives and other priorities in their life that go beyond work. So it's that is really important to I think solving the problem as well.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, and I think back to genders, just thinking about how, even for men, allowing, it's not just for women, right? Allowing men that opportunity too. It's okay for them to walk away and, coach a little league game or be home when a child is sick. And I know my personal situation, I was the default one, right? When a child was sick, I stayed home. And I think that's how a lot of women feel. So knowing that a culture is open to opportunities, I think is great for women in general. So thank you for that. So I think we did touch on this a little bit in some of these answers, but maybe just to refine, when we think about encouraging the development of female leaders in organizations, what does that look like? And actually, maybe before I do that, I wanted to just, I'm sorry, Leanne, I kind of cut you off there. Did you want to say anything more about the societal level around
there were a couple of things that I did want to expand on. So
sorry about that.
No problem. So, Tisha talked really about the pipeline problem, right? So how do we encourage more women? And so I just want to tie that into some of the other answers, which is that the more work organizations do to eliminate discrimination, to make their workplaces more work-friendly, work-family friendly, the more people have the opportunities to engage in what they consider to be meaningful and impactful work, then the more attracted women will be to enter these fields. People do talk a lot about implicit biases and subtle forms of discrimination. I guess one thing I would like to point out is that while we still have inequalities at a societal level, that even if an organization did everything to eliminate all of its, explicit discrimination as well as all of its implicit or discrimination or implicit biases, they're still not going to be able to achieve gender equity. And that's because if women are only making up, let's say, 13% of all potential engineers, right, you're not going to be able to get gender equity for the engineers within your firm. And so what I would encourage organizations to do is to look at the qualifications that they require, both for getting in the door, as well as the experiences that they require in order for people to be promoted, and to look to see whether or not there are gender discrepancies in those qualifications, and think long and hard about whether or not there's other ways to give people the opportunities to get the training or the on-the-job experience so that they can then have the skills and qualifications that are needed, so that then you can move toward greater gender equity. And then finally, the last thing I want to add is that there was a great paper called The Glass Ceiling is Your Husband. And so as we think about gender equity, so it's great for organizations to say, like, we've got the policies and go ahead and use it. You really won't be judged negatively by your supervisors, by your coworkers. Everyone's going to share, everyone's going to pitch in. We all experience this at one time or other. But if for women, they go home and, they're doing triple duty, then we're not going to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what happens at home as well. And I think we've seen that in spades during COVID, and that disproportionate effect on women on the home front, and what that's done for a lot of women, self-selecting themselves out of jobs and taking a step away from their professions. So a scary concept, and how we can recover from that is something else too from that perspective. So that's actually a really good segue. Thank you, Leanne. And again, apologies for cutting you off there, because I know that was a really important element of that discussion when we back to the conversation around how we encourage and develop female leaders. And I think about you mentioned how, getting into an organization. I know we've done some studies and we in Women in Power, and personally we've had stories of women who talk about the mentorship aspect and not having the support to continue in their careers early in their careers. And we find that a lot of women will step away from STEM careers if there isn't that early support. So it's that whole process of getting them in and keeping them. So, and then once you've got them, how do you develop them? And so this is a bit about this discussion. So I'd like to turn it over to the panel to chat a little bit more about what, how can we develop female leaders and what does that look like?
Maybe I'll jump in on that one to start, because speaking to STEM specifically and engineering in particular, the retention issue is huge because there's 20 to 30% of engineering programs across the country and in Canada are women right now, but the stat of 13% overall is quite alarming. That basically means that 2 out of 3 will effectively leave the profession after graduation. So that's a serious problem, and really, doesn't reflect well, frankly, on the professions. I'm embarrassed by that. We need to address and retain the women that enter this profession of engineering, but it applies to every profession. We need to encourage them to stay in, and reassurances and role models, and breaking through the traditional assumptions that go with particular professions like engineering or STEM is really important.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
This is Jana. For me, it's been from a personal experience, is just having that those leaders that really encourage your own development as well. A few years ago, I had the opportunity. My manager invested in me and allowed me to do a women's development program here in my local community in Dallas, where I was able to engage with other folks in the industry with myself, right, and better understand their perspectives. And we learned a lot, not only about our, how to manage your career, your personal brand. So just really that taking the time, and it's not something that's singled out for females, but it is something that helps to close that gap, I think, that we've talked about from an equity perspective. And then I think also from both the employee and the organization to really be intentional about that mentoring, networking, and finding those sponsors in the organization to help you with your career as well. And I think those are really important things. And again, it is definitely a portion of the organization, but it also has to do a lot with the individual, and that I think it comes from the confidence that the organization allows them to have on their authentic self as well. So those are some of the things I think about, and just the opportunities, like we said, around flexibility to make time for all the different parts of your life as well for your development.
Yeah. I would agree with both Jim and Jana's insights, and would only just add that, in addition to fostering those internal networks through mentorship or even internal sponsors, there's also the richness in having, employee resource groups that may be focused and have a particular focus around, in amplifying women's careers within their organizations, and also in the absence of having, say, a formal mentorship program, can be a pathway to enable those types of connections to happen. And then as well, other groups, Women in Power is a great example. I mean, that's just been tremendous locally here, and love to see where that goes, apart from just our city walls and borders. But I mean, that's a great example as well, where regardless of your career and your experience level, you have access to many in different industries and roles who have their own shared experiences, and you've got that place to just come together and connect, in the absence of who do I find to try to help me to talk to have a conversation. And then I think the key thing too that Jen's mentioned as well, and so is Leanne, is from an organization perspective. I think we talked a lot about strategy and overall, like, why are you doing this, right? So from an organization perspective, like, what's your end game? What are you trying to achieve? And align those actions that really point right back to the why. And engaging into employee listening may be extremely insightful to be able to hear what are some of those employee experiences around career development, around whatever that subject is, so that you can really start to understand from an organization perspective what's happening. What are the, data is important, and it helps you to be able to enable decision making and to really understand where you need to apply some attention to, particularly from an inclusion perspective. And that's just the other thing that I would just really add in terms of, an organization encouraging development of female leaders. I think they need to understand too, what's going well, what's not going well, and where are there opportunities for them at an organization level to really enhance that experience, to make it meaningful.
I just want to double down on that inclusion piece. I think it's really important as leaders in an organization to ensure that everybody has an equal opportunity to participate in decisions and conversations. And it's not always the case that many genders, women will be much more reluctant to participate in the conversation. And it's really important for the people leading conversations and leading meetings and leading organizations to ensure that the opportunities are there and that they're actively soliciting the diverse perspectives and the gender perspectives that go along with conversations inside an organization or with clients.
You're absolutely right, Jim. From my business partner team has had many experiences where they reached out to people within the organization who they didn't quite see them raising their hand for, an internal role or an opportunity. And some of them have been the female that were just like, oh, I just, they looked at the role and they were like, I didn't see a perfect match. Right. And it's even right. It's taking an opportunity in a different team, doing something different. And, they've been where they were for a few years and they just didn't see that alignment for them to actually even put their name forward. And so you do need those internal people who are sponsoring for you, both male, both female, to be able to help that, because you're right, Jim, it's not an easy thing and it's not a natural thing either. So expands from bringing into the conversation, but also with regards, back to the talent piece, really looking at abilities in a broad way and helping those who haven't put their hand up where, hey, you can do this, and encouraging them. Sometimes that's really all it takes, is to have somebody just, exercise that confidence in you, so that you can increase that own confidence within yourself to take that leap.
Yeah, and that's the true sense of empowerment. I mean, that is, and thank you for the mention of Women in Power. That is what we're trying to achieve through the work that we're doing is giving women, I want to say a voice, but it's sharing, it's those shared experiences, and they know I'm not alone. Someone else has gone through this, and even to talk about things like you don't have to check all 10 boxes on on a job description to be able to put your name forward, and so learning those things from each other as we share those experiences. And we've got mentorship programs that have been enormously successful, and just recently had a reach out from Norquest College, and again a group of STEM women who are looking for mentors in the industry. So we're looking at a partnership there. Women are, it's that we've always been, even historically, connectors. So I think that's really important, and to have those opportunities within an organization, whether that's a one-on-one mentorship or groups or circles like we do through Women in Power, or other means with an ESG employee or an ERG employee resource group within organizations. The more opportunities, the better the chances are of that increase in diversity. Leanne, did you want to add anything to this one?
Yeah, so I guess one thing to add is that often when managers are giving accounts for why women weren't promoted, they will say that they didn't have the required background experiences. And so at an organizational level, it's really important, like if there are critical, so let's say there's certain types of projects or a certain client that people need to have worked with in the past, then make sure that women get those developmental opportunities so then they do have the demonstrated qualifications. And the second thing is, people have talked a lot about why women might not see themselves as fitting that role. And I think the issue of, what does our prototypical leader look like is really important, right? And so our prototypical leader is a white man, right? It is somebody, who is decisive and is powerful and, maybe some people might even think ruthless, right? And so when there's and then we can think about our stereotype of a typical woman, right, who's going to be nurturing and gentle and compassionate. And so when we've got this mismatch, people are not going to feel like, they meet the mold. And so I think that it's really important when we talk about leadership and, if we're thinking about, informal paths to leadership, as well as thinking about like those selection committees and what they're looking for and what the criteria are, that we need to make sure that we've got gender, so I don't think neutral is the right word. It's gender expansive or gender inclusive definitions of leadership. And so if you don't mind, I'm going to make a plug for some of the work that I did for the University of Guelph for a second. And so I'm going to share my screen. We went and we interviewed people at various levels within the organization, people holding senior leadership positions, people who are informal leaders, people working in teams, to ask them what successful leadership looks like. And then we made sure that we oriented them to be talking about successful leadership that women are displaying, as well as successful leadership that men and people of other genders are displaying. And you can see that, and then we had them come up with behavioral examples too. And so a lot of the competencies that came up are things that we might think of women as being traditionally strong on, right? So having a strong person focus, being open, having integrity, really focusing on team development, having open communication, as well as then issues around leading the organization, like problem solving and strategy, those areas that we traditionally think of as being more masculine. And so I think that an important element to getting women into leadership positions is to make sure that we define leadership in a way that women will be able to see themselves as fitting, and others, when they're making those selection decisions, will see women as fitting.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think, back to, we talk about hard skills and soft skills, soft skills are human skills, right? And I think we need to see that in all of our leaders. That balance that you speak about is not, that's for regardless of gender, for women to feel supported, for others, to feel supported, you need both elements, or all of those elements of leadership. So I think that's a real shift. And I hope that we can see that, especially, if anything good were to come out of COVID, is that aspect, right? And we've seen the need for that human side more than anything, and more recently. So that's fantastic. Thank you. Unless anybody had anything else to add to that, I can step on to a little bit of a discussion now. We'll shift gears a little bit, but maybe not, back to when we talk about leaders and allies, and how can one be a successful ally? What does engagement look like, and how important are allies in this discussion? So maybe Jim, if you want to lead that off, or unless somebody had something they wanted to start off with.
Sure, I don't mind leading it off. I'll be brief. No, it's really important that we have to be leading by example, in a sense of leading discussions and conversations. An ally is someone that would support and ultimately promote and defend and the objectives of the organization and the objectives of being equitable in all respects. So it's it can be inside an organization, it can be an external person that can be identified and provide a mentorship outside of the organization if there's nobody available inside, so that nobody feels like they're alone. They need to be considered as part of the group and part of the organization.
Thank you. And is that something, you mentioned your work with flipped learning and your DEI program, is that something that you've incorporated into that, or something you're looking at?
Yeah, we're definitely looking at the mentorship piece and ensuring that there are role models and people that are able to identify with others in the organization, to ensure that their expectations and that they do feel included in the conversations, and that yeah, and that is one of the things that, from a strategy perspective, training all the leaders in the organization, it's hard to make sure that that perspective is covers all corners of the organization in a geographically diverse, dispersed organization like Williams with many offices. It's hard to ensure that is happening everywhere in a consistent way, and that consistency is really important because what happens in one location can impact the perception of the organization everywhere.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can jump in, Charlene, on this one. I thought I might just share two kind of examples of allyship and what it looked like to me. One happened much earlier in my career, and I just remember, it was a smaller office, but everybody went into the conference room, and then it was myself and one other woman who was left out at our desks, not participating in the meeting. And for me, it would have been fine. We were the younger folks in the office, so I think we were not being included due to experience level, not because of equity or gender, but there was nobody who shared that kind of perspective with me. So it looked intentionally bad, even though I think that, it was different. It wasn't meant to be that way in that discussion. So, that's kind of, if the leader or another leader had come out and shared with me just a little bit more about what that looked like and why, and even to offer to share some of the outcome and discuss it with me after the meeting, that would have been a very nice allyship discussion. Later in my career, I stepped a little bit above where I had been in the organization, and really went for one of those jobs that was very much of interest to me. And, I interviewed with the team and got high accolades. And then they asked me to interview with a global stakeholder who would also be interacting with the role. And as I asked for feedback from the leader, he did say that there was some concerns about my ability in the role to really deal with the politics of the job, and just kind of some of the global interaction cultures, et cetera. And, he said that I see a lot in you that shows that you will not do it the way he would expect you to do it, but you will do it the way that is most authentic to you and how you handle that type of culture and that the role of the job. And so, it gave me that kind of feedback was very helpful and showed confidence from him. And then also it created a little bit of confidence and a little bit of competition for me moving forward to make sure that I succeeded in that role as well. So, I think those are just some kind of examples of just those conversations are so big, and just helping to mentor and help others along their career, again, regardless of gender, but especially in a male-dominated career field like myself, that's an important piece to have as well.
Excellent.
Having someone stand up as part of that process internally to make sure that bias and lack of equity doesn't consume or sort of dominate a process like that is really important. That's where allies can really play an important role.
I'd like to in on the importance of allies speaking up when they see discrimination occurring. And that's because of the difficulty of the other two parties in seeing discrimination occurring, right? So most people want to think of themselves as fair. Most people want to think of themselves as unbiased, non-discriminatory, unprejudiced. And so if they're called out on it, right, they're going to have a very strong defensive reaction. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to be hard for them to hear it from anyone. What makes it really important that they hear it from somebody who's an ally as opposed to somebody who belongs to the marginalized group is that when you are the victim, right, it's often ambiguous, right? Sometimes it's blatant, in which case it's like pretty horrifying. You can't believe what just happened, and it's very hard to speak up in that moment. But often it's pretty subtle. And so it's hard to interpret what just happened, what the grounds were for somebody treating you in that manner. And, you're spinning your wheels, right, processing this. And so it's hard to speak up in that moment. And then if you do manage to label it as discrimination, then you just make yourself a huge target, right? And so if you belong to a marginalized group, often there's going to be negative stereotypes about your group that people can then just use, right? When they're feeling defensive, right? They can just draw on those stereotypes and apply them to you, and now you're the unreasonable one. You're the one who saw things and took things in a wrong way, and don't you understand what a joke is, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's really important for allies to speak up, particularly if they are people in positions of power within the organization.
Tisha, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, just to expand on what Leanne said, and thanks for sharing that. And Jana, thank you for sharing that story. You know, that's really real. And I think, you know, the allyship concept and how that works in an organization is extremely dynamic, and it involves so many things, I think, from my perspective. The encouragement of the speaking up, the creating a culture where the ally feels safe to be able to speak up, because part of allyship is putting yourself out there for someone who you're not going to get anything in return and may also feel a brunt of that, right? It's about putting yourself out on the line because you fundamentally, like, that is not right. And, you know, you need to know why I think that's not right. And so I think it's extremely dynamic, and fair to say that many organizations are still working a lot on that journey, and some are farther along. I think for ourselves and our experiences, it's definitely something that we've got a lot of people within our organizations who are allies for others, and we have others that need to understand what that means. And exactly to what Leanne just pointed out, right? It comes right back to some of these unconscious biases, and then if you're in a leadership position, you have, you know, inherent power to make decisions. You know, who you hire, who you promote, or influence that in a way that has an impact. So yeah, I think that it also goes hand in hand with your work culture and a lot of the work that you're doing from a culture perspective, which then also trickles down from the top level, you know, to your senior leaders in your organization, your whole leadership community, and right back to what is your leadership philosophy? What are those leadership competencies? As Leanne pulled out that inclusive framework, which I really love. So thanks for sharing that. And how are we evaluating leaders on that as well too? And are those types of conversations coming up to the table when they're being evaluated, right? Not just about performance and productivity and making the numbers, but the experiences. How have they been promoters? Who have they been mentoring or developing, or just opening that door? So yeah, I would just add that as a additional thing to the conversation, that I do think it's really dynamic, and that's why it's work, because it's like mind work, it's heart work, and moving everybody along and trying to get everybody, you know, at that same pace of a movement is the challenge.
It's interesting you brought up the idea of numbers and going, you know, these metrics that are, you know, frankly easy to measure, whether or not the measurements are actually calculated correctly or not. There's a number, and it's easy to understand that, but it is very important to understand the cultural impact that one individual can have. They might be hitting their numbers and all these great business metrics and KPIs and all these sorts of things, but that person can be extremely destructive inside the organization if they're not promoting the values of the organization, and equity being one of them. And so it's, you know, it's important to remove the subjectivity if at all possible, but numbers don't tell the whole story, and that's really hard to quantify as part of the conversation. But it is important to remove, you know, have a hiring process as one example where you're looking for important characteristics and approaches and perspectives, and it's not a function of, well, I think maybe this person might not be able to deal with this particular thing. That's really going outside the boundaries of an equitable process inside an organization.
Yeah. Versus how can we support this person to do this, to be this, and back to Leanne's comment about how we view leaders and what that looks like, I think is important, and the skills set and that they provide. So I will, you know, allyship is something that we discuss a lot at Women in Power, and I'm behooved to do a little bit of a plug here for, we've got an upcoming session actually on allyship that I just want to mention before we move on to the next session. But we are in October on the 25th, we've got Pamela Teagarden, and she's going to be talking about, and for us, we've really honing in on the strategies for building effective ally relationships in the workplace, but both from the ally and from the partner perspective. So, you know, I think it's incumbent on both sides, if we want to say sides, to ensure that relationships are developed that are supportive and provide an inclusive environment, and then how women can actually develop those relationships proactively, and what that looks like. And back to the comment that Leanne made, you know, that allows us to develop a culture in relationships where we're safe to say, you know, I don't like what you said, or, you know, so then we don't have to necessarily rely on allies for that, but they're there, but that we also have those relationships as well. So would encourage anybody who's interested in that discussion to join us, become a member, join us. It's a member event. So
Yes.
yes, and just moving on, I know I'm just trying to conscious of time, and we wanted to allow for some questions. Maybe just quickly, our last question was around how the gender diversity landscape has changed since our panelists started in the industry, and what they've seen, and how we think that will evolve in the next 5 years. Yeah, so I'll give everyone a chance to speak to that, and then we'll go to questions, if that's all right. Who'd like to start? Jana, I'll pick you.
Okay. You know, I think that, so I am an engineer by trade, went to school for engineering, have evolved my career in a lot of different ways, but definitely remained inside of the construction and engineering fields. And so I'd say that, you know, we see a lot more in the STEM fields. It's still not as great as it should be from a female and a gender diversity perspective, but I think there's a lot more. And I think that, you know, there's also a sense of women helping women more now as well, especially in male dominated fields, which is important as well. And then I think that, you know, there's a lot of, I think the future is bright in a lot of ways. And I think that a lot of, you know, the women on the call, a lot of women that I've worked with in my career, we're paving the way for what this looks like, along with our allies like Jim, who's on the call as well, moving forward. So I think the future is bright, and I'm excited for it. So I'm excited to help to, you know, if you think about your career from an individual perspective, and in your first kind of tier, you're figuring out yourself, your direction, who you are, what you want to be in your field. Then you're learning how to lead and really, you know, manage and be a part of a broader strategy and company. And then you have to get in this kind of tier where you're able to really drive that allyship and the mentorship and working backwards and helping others. So I think, you know, for all of us in those later years of our career, although I'm not totally there yet, I hope, but, you know, how do we help others and really mentor and bring up other females in the industry and help them get that confidence in their authentic self to work.
That's great, Jana. No, I do. Yeah, to your point, I think historically, and I've seen a shift in that. I mean, I hope Women in Power has helped with that. But women, we were oftentimes our own worst enemies. You know, I got here, so therefore you've got to work as just as hard or even harder than, you know, instead of swathing the path for the women behind us and making the job easier for them. So I'm hopeful in that regard as well. Jim, do you want to?
To me, it's about, well, the future and you know, what's changing, and it's information and data and knowledge, and the availability and the sort of leveling of the playing field of information. You know, just having an opinion and speculation, although that is, you know, sometimes all that you need to have a huge voice on social media these days. But the data is important, and you know, people in STEM in particular are all about the numbers. So if we have information that we can disseminate to everybody in an organization and to our clients and to the community around why we're doing this and why it's important, I think that makes a huge difference, and it really breaks down, changes the conversation, breaks down the sort of biases, and challenges people to look beyond, you know, sort of internal opinions, and to look and focus on more unbiased information.
Tisha?
I would agree with Jan and Jim, and I'd say that just to add to that, I think Jana mentioned this, definitely have seen, even within our organization, a increase in women in STEM fields. We're starting to see more data analysts. We're starting to see more women in the cybersecurity space from a technical perspective as well too, and that's been really lovely to be able to see that, and to see that qualified, not entry level either. Like, we're talking definitely careered in that space. So that's great to see. And I think Jana mentioned that the power of connection, which and Charlene talked about, which I think is incredibly dynamic, and that's what I think has shifted and will continue to shift. I believe that, if an organization doesn't take the lead in this space and really trying to foster this for their organization and really looking at equity in a holistic manner, that really impacts your overall brand. And as an employee in your employee value proposition, you're really looking at the organizations that you think align with your values. And if anything, from COVID, we've seen, lots of papers and articles out in the past year alone about that employee value proposition and how that shifted for potential job seekers, and how people are choosing whether or not they do want to work full-time or work for this organization, because now they've really taken the stock around their whole wellness and their whole well-being, and that also includes who they belong to as an organization, and if they truly feel like they belong there as well too, or if that organization is really moving forward in the space around inclusion and sense of belonging.
Great. Yeah, I agree. Oh, sorry, I'll let you go ahead, Leanne. Yep.
That's okay. I was just going to say the fact that, all of the panelists can describe the exciting work that their organizations are doing, I think shows a lot of advancement in the last 20, 25 years. Equity, diversity, inclusion work is no longer at the margins. So it's on people's radars. I think a lot of organizations are starting this work. Some have been working at it quite intensively for a while now, and so there are other models that can be followed. But I think in order to really get a good last push, people need to look at this not from a perspective of threat. So it can't be seen as zero sum, right? So advancements for women are, at the threat of men. Advancements for ethnic minorities are whites' loss. So I think that people need to see how having more inclusive and diversity-friendly workplaces benefit everybody, right? Because those issues of like being able to be your authentic self, issues like having work-life balance, and I say work-life because to not exclude those people who don't have kids, right, or elder care responsibilities, right? So having organizations that are very concerned with, ethical and fair treatment and removing discrimination against all individuals really does help benefit everyone.
100%, yeah.
Great point.
Okay, so I'll move on to questions, and then we'll just maybe wrap up with our final kind of ask you panelists to think about if there was one thing you wanted to leave, one thought you wanted to leave everybody with, what would that be? So I'll turn to that just before we go. But in the meantime, I do have a question and would encourage anyone else on the call today to type any questions that you might have for the panelists, and we can address them in the time that we have remaining, which isn't too much. We've got 8 minutes. I have one though. I'm not sure who wants to take this one, but do you have any tips or strategies that one can use to remove unconscious biases in the hiring process? So I think that was mentioned by a couple of you, and what are your what does that look like in organizations? What can an organization do to within the recruitment process to?
Yeah, we're just exploring this, and I don't want to pronounce your name incorrectly, but I can see it in the chat for who asked the question. But we're just starting to explore strategies in this space. And in just some thinking, just with my team, we've been thinking about, and our Inclusion Diversity Council, we've talked about having a diverse hiring team, you know, and even just really mixing that up. Traditionally, it's usually been the hiring manager, maybe one other person, maybe from the department, and the business partner. And so looking at how do we just mix that up so that we get these diverse perspectives around this one candidate. We start to compile that, work together as a team, and looking at putting that together. Taking off names is also something that I know lots of organizations have tried that as well too, and have done that. And I think that even from a social experiment has proved that, you know, there is some strong value in doing that. And also, I think in the onset of before you even get into interviews is really setting that criteria as to what is going to be successful in this role. What are we looking for? What are some of the absolute skills that we really need? And what are some of the skills we can supplement? You know, if we see a candidate that doesn't have the 5 years, they only got the 2, how can we help supplement that? And actually just go into your interviewing process with that mindset so that you don't have people looking at perfection and trying to find that exact to the list. Because if you do have a base that's, you know, technical base, they're going to go by the list, right? So you have to help them with that. So those are just some ideas, and then throughout the whole interviewing process to really just go back to that criteria as your guide as you're going through the selection of candidates, and being open to switch things up, to be able to test things out in people that you may not just get in the first interview. You might have to do the second interview differently, an assignment, whatever, you know, to test the skills that you're really looking for in that role.
That's great. I don't have to say one of my best hires was one I hadn't even chosen. It was a misstep. My HR partner called the wrong person, but I ended up hiring them. So you never know, right? But yeah, thank you for that. Does anybody else want to add that, or?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on what Tasha said. So to, you know, strongly concur with everything that you said. So I put into the chat a paper that I published. We did research on implicit bias and how it affects hiring decisions. We did this study in the context of implicit biases against Asians. And what we found was that for both people who are low in explicit prejudice, right, so people who really think that they're not prejudiced, as well as people who acknowledge that they do have prejudices, for both of those groups, the more implicit bias they have, the more likely they are to discriminate against an Asian job candidate versus an equally matched white candidate. So just changing the name. But it's only when the qualifications are ambiguous. Right, so when somebody is clearly qualified for the job, then implicit bias doesn't come into play. And so people need to know not only what are the competencies or the qualifications that we're looking for, but also how then do you score the candidate. And so with the typical interview, right, where people which are unstructured and people just, you know, chit chat, right, and you get a feel and a vibe for a candidate, lots of bias will come through. If instead what you have is a set series of questions that have been designed in order to get those core competencies that you know are required for a good job performance, and then you have a scoring sheet for how to interpret candidates' responses, and everybody is held to the exact same standard, it's very difficult then for implicit biases to come through. So yes, having representation in terms of your panel, training people about how biases might come into play, but creating very rigorous selection methods can also help to reduce implicit bias.
Great point, Leanne. I just wanted to, you know, one last call for any questions. I don't know if anybody has any from the participants. Otherwise, I'll move on to our final question. If you've had some time to think about, if you wanted to leave everyone here today with one thought from our discussion today, what would it be? Want to go ahead, Jana?
Sure. Yeah, I'll jump in. One thing that we often show, or quote we often show in our D&I strategy or diversity and inclusion strategy is around, I am not different from you, I am different like you. And we talked about this in our prep sessions, and I just think it's a great quote and a great way to kind of think about this topic. And, so I'm not different from you, I am different like you, is what I'd like people to lead with.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Jim?
I guess we really are, as an organization, and I think any organization is looking for better outcomes, better business outcomes, but also better outcomes for our community. And this is essential. The topic of equity, gender equity, is essential to ensure that the solutions and the organizations reflect our communities. And that is really important to be a sustainable organization in itself. And so it's really a business imperative at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
I would just like to share with participants a quote that I've heard, but then I heard an extension of the quote, so I'll just share it. It's by Verna Mathers, and it's diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. Equity means everyone has access to the dance floor, and belonging allows everyone to dance how they feel. So ultimately, that's the work. It's the it's actually I truly feel it's a purpose-driven work. When you think about trying to shape and influences for an organization and bringing all the people along the way, and ultimately it's for all of us so that we could be all that party, music's playing, diverse playlists, everybody's on the dance floor dancing however they want, and nobody even notices because we're all having a good time. So overall, it's about that experience of the party versus how everybody looked at the party or what we saw at the party. So definitely our what we're endeavoring to do at the ISO, and as well as everybody who's an employee at the ISO, regardless if you're working in the work directly or not.
Thank you. Love that.
I think Tasha's quote says it all. I can't top that. I want you to send it to me so I can use it in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, maybe if you could throw that into the chat, Tasha. And then I had noted, you maybe missed it, Leanne, if you mentioned that article, the glass ceiling article.
Sure. Glass ceiling
that into the chat as well for participants.
Okay.
And Jim, you already did. You did speak. So we're good. We're good. And timing wise, we're great. We're just a minute over. So I just want to take the opportunity to thank everybody for participating today, our panelists for the time, planning and organizing and being here today, to DEC for hosting this, and to all of our participants for being here today and engaging in this discussion. I'll hand it back to you, Erin. Is there anything you wanted to say to close things off?
No, I think that was about it. I want, again, thank you all for participating in the panel as panelists, and thanks to everybody who attended. This webinar is being recorded, so once it's ready to go, I will send it all out for anybody that couldn't make it. But again, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Erin.
Thanks, Erin, and thanks, everyone.